The price of silver you saw is not the price of silver. It is the price of a promise about silver. And those are two very different things. That is the whole story. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here is the answer to the question in the title, plainly, before I prove a single word of it. What happened to silver has almost nothing to do with silver the metal, the shiny bars sitting in a vault. It has to do with silver the contract, the paper claim, the IOU that trades on a screen all day long between people who will never in their lives touch an ounce of it. Far more silver changes hands on paper every single day and actually exists anywhere on this earth to be delivered. And when the thing that trades is the promise and not the metal, the promise can be pushed around by people who do not own, do not want, and will never take delivery of the real thing. That is what moved the price. Not supply, not demand, paper. I have spent a long time in the gold and silver world, and I will tell you, this is the single most misunderstood thing about how these markets work. The average retiree watching the price go up and down assumes he is watching a metal being bought and sold. He is not. He is watching a paper contract being wrestled between traders, and the metal is almost an afterthought. Let me show you exactly how that works, because once you understand it, the moves that look insane start to make perfect sense. Picture a small-town machinist, a man who spent 35 years turning steel and put a piece of his retirement into physical silver because he trusts what he can hold in his hand. He watches the price drop hard one afternoon, and he feels sick because to him, that number is real money, real ounces, the real thing sitting in his safe. What he does not know is that the number that just gut-punched him was set by a flurry of paper contracts changing hands in fractions of a second. Contracts where not 1 ounce of actual metal moved. His silver is exactly as heavy, exactly as rare, exactly as useful as it was that morning. Nothing about the real thing changed. Only the paper moved. And the paper is what the whole world stares at. So let me explain the machine itself, the one the big banks and the trading desks would rather you never really looked at. On the main futures exchange, where the world price of silver gets set, contracts trade every day representing an enormous quantity of metal. But the amount of physical silver actually sitting in the registered vaults, the metal genuinely available and earmarked to be delivered against those contracts, is a tiny fraction of it. There are many, many paper claims for every single ounce that could actually be handed over. See that back to yourself slowly. For every real ounce available to deliver, there are stacks of paper promises. If even a modest share of those paper holders ever demanded the real metal at once, there would not be nearly enough to go around. And here is where it gets strange, because you would think a market that fragile would be terrified of a stampede for metal. It is not. And the reason it is not is the quiet genius of the whole arrangement. Almost nobody ever asks for the metal. The paper players roll their contracts forward, cash them out, settle in dollars, and start again. The system runs on the assumption that the promise is as good as the thing, that nobody will call the bluff. And as long as that assumption holds, a relatively small number of very large players can lean on that paper and shove the price in whatever direction suits them on a given day, because they are not fighting over scarce metal. They are just trading promises. And you can print a promise. You cannot print an ounce of silver. This is the part the financial channels will never sit you down and explain, and I want you to understand why. The people who profit from your confusion are the same people setting the price. The big banks that carry huge short positions in silver, the trading desks that make their living on the churn, the media that treats a paper-driven sell-off as if it were real news about the metal. They all benefit from you believing the screen is the truth. When you panic and sell your real ounces because a paper move scared you, you are handing hard metal to the very people who engineered the scare. The frightened seller is the paying customer. That is the business model, and the silence around it is not an accident. Let me name the honest limits here, because I am not going to insult you by pretending this is simple or that I know exactly how it ends. I cannot tell you the day the paper stops setting the price. This structure has held for a very long time, and things that are unstable can stay standing far longer than seems possible. Paper can dominate the price for years, and a patient holder has to be able to sit through moves that feel unfair and make no fundamental sense. Anyone who tells you they know the hour the metal takes over from the paper is selling you certainty that does not exist. This is a case built on structure and history, not a promise and not a prediction. But structure matters, and the structure underneath the paper is quietly tightening in a way that is very hard to fake. Because paper is a claim on metal, and the metal is running short. The world has now run a structural silver deficit for years in a row, meaning more silver gets used up each year than gets mined and recycled. And the gap gets filled by drawing down the above-ground stockpiles that have built up over decades. Those stockpiles are the cushion. That cushion is being drawn down. And when you have a mountain of paper claims sitting on top of a shrinking pile of real metal, you have a slow-building tension that the daily price does not show you at all. Here is a fact most people find hard to believe when they first hear it. You cannot simply mine more silver to fix a shortage, no matter how high the price goes. Most silver on Earth does not come out of the ground from silver mines. It comes out as a byproduct, a leftover from mining copper and zinc and lead. So the amount of new silver produced is chained to how much copper and zinc the world happens to need, not to the price of silver itself. The price of silver could climb and it would barely move the supply, because the men digging are digging for copper. That is a supply side that physically cannot respond quickly, sitting underneath a paper market that can move in a heartbeat. Feel the mismatch there? Now stack on what silver actually gets used for, because this is where the real demand is relentless. Silver goes into solar panels, and the world is building solar at a staggering pace. It goes into electronics, into the electrification of everything, into the guts of the power build-out happening for data centers and modern industry. And here is the cruel part for supply. Most of that silver is used in tiny amounts, spread thin across billions of devices and panels, and it is never economically recovered. It gets buried, scattered, effectively burned. Gold gets hoarded and passed down. Silver gets consumed and lost. Every year, industry quietly eats a portion of the world's silver, and it does not come back. And that brings us to what is happening in the East, which tells you something the paper price is hiding. There has been a persistent, determined pull of physical silver from west to east, with the Shanghai market at times trading at a real premium to the London and New York price. Think about what a premium like that means. It means that in one place, people are willing to pay more for the actual metal in hand than the global paper price says it is worth, because they want the real thing, and there is not enough of it there. When the physical market and the paper market disagree, when metal costs more where people actually take delivery, that is a crack in the story the screen is telling you. That is the real thing, tugging against the promise. I want to pause here, because this is the moment where understanding turns into action, and I would be doing you a disservice if I explained the whole problem and left you with nowhere to go with it. If everything I have just said lands with you, if you can feel the difference between owning a promise and owning the metal, then there is a lesson from history you need to hold on to. When a major nation had its reserves held in the financial system frozen a few years back, the world's central banks learned something in an instant that most savers still have not. Reserves that exist only as someone else's promise can be switched off with the press of a button. But metal sitting in your own vault cannot be frozen, cannot be canceled, and answers to no one's politics. That lesson is exactly why I put together something for people like you. It is called the Free Retirement Wealth Protection Guide, and it is written specifically for American retirees with $100,000 or more in a 401k or an IRA. It walks you through how everyday retirees move a portion of the retirement account they already have into physical gold and silver, real metal, without taxes and without penalties, using what is called a self-directed precious metals IRA. This is not just for insiders or the wealthy. If you have $100,000 or more in any retirement account, this is for you. If you are watching this on your television, just scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to readfamilyguide.com. From our family to yours, no obligation and nothing to buy. It is simply the clearest explanation I know of how to own the metal instead of the promise. Now let me take you back to the machine, because there is a piece of proof you have already lived through, whether you noticed it or not. There have been episodes where the price of silver fell hard and fast, a steep drop in a matter of days. And if you went looking for the reason in the real world, in supply or demand or industry, you found nothing. Nothing fundamental had changed. What changed was the rules of the paper game itself. The cost of holding those contracts got jacked up, and leveraged traders were forced to dump their paper positions all at once. The metal did not become more plentiful. The world did not need less of it. Paper simply stampeded, and it dragged the quoted price of real silver down with it. If you had sold your physical metal in that panic, you would have sold the real thing to satisfy a purely paper problem. And this is not new. Go back through the decades, and you find the same fingerprints again and again. Prices lurching on a shift in policy or a change in the rules of the paper game rather than any real change in the metal itself. A mere hint that a central bank might slow its buying has been enough to send precious metals reeling, even though not 1 ounce disappeared from the earth. The pattern repeats because the machinery repeats. The promise is what trades, so the promise is what breaks, and the honest metal in the vault just sits there taking the blame for a fight it was never part of. There was even a famous attempt by a crowd of ordinary people to force a silver squeeze, to overwhelm the shorts by buying all at once. And for all the noise, it largely failed to break the structure, because the same machine simply generated more paper to absorb the pressure. That is the lesson that stings. In a market where the promise trades instead of the metal, you cannot beat it by playing the paper game, because they can always print more paper than you can buy. The only thing that sits outside the machine, the only thing that cannot be diluted with another contract, is metal you actually hold. Paper begets paper. Metal is finite. That is the entire point. And here is the part that almost nobody connects, the thing that should change how you see every sell-off. If the price is set by paper, then a falling price is not evidence that silver is worth less. It can be the exact opposite. It can be the sound of the promise being pushed down while the real metal is quietly being drained out the back door, bought up by people who understand precisely what I am telling you. In my years watching this, I have seen the same pattern more than once. The loudest fear on the screen and the quietest, steadiest accumulation of physical metal happening underneath it at the same time. The scare and the buying are not opposites. Very often they are the same event, viewed from two different sides. To look honestly at who has already figured this out. The central banks of the world, the largest and most sophisticated buyers on earth, have been accumulating physical metal at a pace we have not seen in generations, buying real gold hand over fist, quietly, year after year, and gold has climbed into record territory while doing it. They are not buying paper promises. They are taking delivery of metal and locking it away, precisely because they learned that a promise can be frozen and a bar cannot. That is the smart money, and it has already moved. Meanwhile, the pension funds, the financial advisors on television, the ordinary saver, are still staring at the screen, treating the paper price as gospel. The gap between what the biggest players are doing and what the crowd understands is enormous right now, and gaps like that do not stay open forever. Because here is how these things actually turn. It will not be announced. There will be no tidy headline the morning it happens, no advisor phoning to tell you the moment has arrived to own the real thing instead of the claim. By the time it is obvious to everyone, by the time the shortage of deliverable metal is leading the news and every talking head is suddenly an expert, the people who understood it early will already be holding what they need, and the rest will be scrambling to buy metal that has become far harder to get. The entire advantage lives in the quiet stretch, the boring stretch, the part where nothing feels urgent and the screen looks calm. That stretch is where you are standing right now. Let me be practical about your own position, because principles matter more here than any prediction. Own the metal, not a paper promise of the metal, if protecting what you built is the goal. Size it so that a paper-driven shakeout, one of those violent, meaningless drops, can never force you to sell at the worst possible moment. The whole trap is designed to frighten weak hands into handing real ounces to strong ones. Do not be the weak hand. A retiree who holds through the paper noise, who understands the drop for what it is playing an entirely different game from the frightened seller dumping into the dip. This is a case, not a guarantee, and it is not personal financial advice. But I have watched enough of these cycles to tell you that the people who understood the difference between paper and metal slept better than the ones who did not. Which brings me back to the machinist in his workshop, staring at a number that made him feel poor for an afternoon. If he understood what you now understand, that the number was a promise being shoved around and not a verdict on his metal, he would set down his phone, walk over to his safe, and feel exactly the opposite of poor. Nothing about his silver changed. It weighed the same. It was just as rare, just as needed by a world that is quietly running short of it. The only thing that moved was the paper, and the paper was never the point. That is what nobody noticed happened to silver. The promise moved. The metal did not. If this opened your eyes, let me leave you with the way to act on it, for yourself and for the people who come after you. That same free retirement wealth protection guide will show you step by step how retirees move a portion of what they have built into physical gold and silver inside the retirement account they already own, without taxes and without penalties, so that a piece of your wealth is real metal in a vault and not a claim on a screen. And this is not only about you, it is about what you pass down, the security your children and your grandchildren inherit, protected in a form that no trading desk can dilute and no policy can freeze. For those of you with $100,000 or more who watch this all the way through, mention that when you reach out, and you can sit down one-on-one at no cost for a private educational web conference where we walk through your specific situation. There is no fake deadline here, and I will not invent one. The honest truth is simpler. The moment to make this move calmly, while it is still cheap and easy and nothing feels urgent, is exactly the moment when nothing feels urgent, which is today. If you are watching on your television, scan the QR code on your screen. If you are on your phone or your computer, go to readfamilyguide.com. From our family to yours, own the metal, not the promise, and let the paper do whatever it wants.